Hey guys, hi, welcome back once again. My name is Vaishali and today I'd like to talk about change and on some level our resistance to change as well. We all like the idea of change, for on some level things have started to feel stale. We like the idea of change with regards to things, at times ourselves, our interactions, our perceptions, our relationships, the other person, our partners, our children, our parents, our reactions, our life experiences. And yet, there's a big part of us that has gotten habituated and familiar to its own mechanisms, to its own habituated ways of interactions that even resists the change, and it really resists it hard. So why then is change so difficult? Because in my understanding, any change is also an exchange, calls for an exchange. Just like the leaves of the tree, just like the becoming of the butterfly, the tree, in order to remain green, has to shed some, at times many leaves, to make way for new ones, which unfortunately doesn't come to bloom immediately. It never does happen that as soon as a big leaf falls away, we get to see another big new fresh leaf in its place. It never happens that the caterpillar that has fed so much suddenly emerges as a butterfly. It necessarily has to get so fed up of remaining a caterpillar that it actually needs to dissolve itself to become a butterfly. And what I gathered as I looked up for this particular information in keeping with the transformation of the caterpillar was that the caterpillar starts to digest its own self. Now imagine dissolving and eating and digesting your own self. Imagine literally doing that. The caterpillar releases enzymes that start to liquefy almost the entire caterpillar. And at that point in time, if you were to cut open a cocoon, the caterpillar would actually ooze out like a smoothie or a soup. Now imagine yourself becoming a soup. Difficult, right? And if I imagined and literally felt within and throughout my entire physiology, that is my entire body, it literally is an invitation to one's own death. And metaphorically, every change is like death on some level. For every change calls for grieving of the loss of what once had been, of what we had become accustomed to, of what we identified with and identified as. And to shed old leaves and to make space for new, to shed old skin to make way for new, innately calls for the loss and thereby the grief of the familiar. Which reminds me of a quote which goes something like this: a snake that does not cast its old skin will perish, as well as the minds which are prevented from changing their opinions. They cease to be minds. And throughout our human history, there have been many examples that have proven that change is not only the only constant, but a necessary evil as well. And if it is a necessary evil, it does demand something in exchange as well. So let's first take up a few examples here. The journey of Buddha from Siddhartha was an unconventional one, was never an easy one, but was a necessary one. The story of Emperor Ashoka literally required him to go down on his knees. The story of Valmiki from dacoit to the sage and the composer of the Ramayana could never have been that easy. And we can ask this question to all the students and the teachers as well. The story of Andre Agassi, the tennis legend. The story of Amish Tripathi from marketing and product manager to becoming an author. The story of Martha Beck of Peter Crone, one of the world's best life coaches and mind architect. The story of Glennon Doyle, the school teacher who turned into best-selling author and the founder of Together Rising, have all been transformational, but have never been easy. They all had to pay that exchange price for the change that they wanted in their own lives, that they wanted in their own selves, that they wanted in their own relationships, and that they wanted to see in the world. Now, even coming back to the home turf, Regaining our independence literally demanded life or lives to be put at stake. Did it happen without any loss, without any grief? Quite naturally, no. It demanded the loss of every belief, of every habit that we had gotten habituated to in the course of us being enslaved and subjugated to over hundreds and thousands of years in exchange for our independence. Even in recent years, we have had similar experiences both on individual and collective level when COVID-19 had taken over the world, when it was a pan-epidemic. And invariably, almost all of us wanted to return back to what had been familiar to us, because a new demands us to rethink. A new asks us to reflect. For any change questions almost everything we had thought about ourselves. And the COVID scenario even cornered us within our own homes, where homes to many felt like prison camps. It made us question our relationship with ourselves and others. And fortunately or unfortunately, change demands letting go of the known, or a major chunk of the known. And yet, as we gradually came into the new, adapted to the new, the ecosphere, our biosphere, had begun to recover itself. But it required humans to become different, to behave differently, to stop remaining indifferent to our ecosystems and to ourselves. And many of us experienced that change to be painful, for it was unfamiliar. It was unautomated. And unfortunately, since change doesn't come without an exchange, without the loss of the familiar, unless we get okay with being able to hold that loss on individual and collective levels, a big part of us will be in resistance to it, and thereby keep perpetuating the same old over and over and over again. Change, as pleasant as it may sound, even calls for the dissolution of the former identity to the ideas of what we thought we were, what we have been. And since our culture has a profound distaste and displeasure for unknowingness, for ambiguity, for embracing the grief of the familiar habituated loss, many a times many of us prefer to keep ourselves confined to what's habituated and known, which is an interplay of what is known as our ego construct, but it is also that keeps us stuck. And as Peter Crone would say, we are attached to the image of ourselves that we have crafted, of course in collaboration with others. And many of us will fight tooth and nail to keep that image intact, thereby sabotaging not only ourselves, but others as well. And unless we loosen our grip on the desire to resist the change, we will remain stuck in the same sticky situations. And only when we understand the mechanism of change can we get comfortable with the feelings of loss, of disappointment, of grief, of holding space for all kinds of emotions. And only when we can embrace the full spectrum of ourselves can we actually stop running from our own selves. For whatever we are not willing to feel, we cannot really deal with. What we cannot deal with is something that we cannot heal. And what we cannot heal gets passed on. Not just in the physical, mental, and emotional space within us and that we share with others, but also as a learning mechanism by those around us, which unfortunately hinders resilience and also hinders the feeling of trust amongst each other. For if you're not willing to look at the loss and the grieving aspect of the exchange for change, that there is no one else whose support I can rely on to, which also to a degree leads to mistrust within one's own self. So let's try and reflect upon all of these exchange factors for change, for no change happens without any of them. Let's try and reflect as to what we are afraid to lose and even more afraid to grieve the loss of. Let's try and think about the projected image that we have crafted and co-crafted. Let's try and think if we actually believe that we have no support system. Let's try and think if we actually believe that we have really no one else to count on, that there is no support system to help us grieve the loss of the familiar if we are looking for some kind of a change. Let's try and reflect as to where we have misplaced or even lost our trust factor. Let's try and reflect upon the cumulative effect of all of these factors which might be inhibiting the exchange process of change. Let's try and do that for ourselves, and I will see you once again the next week. Till then, stay tuned in. And guys, if you do like the contextual content of my videos, please do like, share and subscribe.